Yo, hey yo. All right, guys. I'm gonna discuss. First, welcome to my bench. This is the first video I've done on my workbench. You guys kind of see the workspace here. I'm gonna cover probably a little bit all over the map, but I'm gonna cover everything from my quad setup again, like I did before. But I'm gonna get a little bit more in depth, talk about life cycle, kind of when I look to replace certain components, things like arms, motors, the frame, bolts, the types of bolts I use, stuff like that. We're gonna get kind of into the weeds. This should be a little bit more in depth than what I did the back of that pickup truck in the middle of the field a few months back. And I'll also talk a little bit about kind of the tools I use, why I use the tools that I have, and then my mentality or methodology around the components I choose and why I choose them. Straight out of the gate or right off the bat, I'm a big advocate of buy once, cry once. Things like tools. These tools I've had for almost 10 years now. Turnigy, they don't even sell them anymore. They've discontinued them, quite a long time ago. But these things have been dope-tastic. Had them for a really long time. I wish I could find more of them, but I can't. So I hang on to these things. Are pretty near and dear to my heart. But I digress already. I didn't even get started yet. So first thing first, I want to jump right into the quads. You guys take a look here. My friends on here, people that I know really well or that are really close to me, know that I used to constantly bust their bags about having more than one quad. I was always like, you can't maintain more than one quad, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I've changed that mindset completely. The reason being is because I break things so frequently that I hate to go out to a location, snap something, and then not be able to continue flying the rest of the day or a couple hours after that. So I've had to build two quads. One is from my primary, so this is my primary quad, and then this is my backup. I still fly my backup as regularly as I do my primary, and I flip-flop them. Actually, the very last video that I filmed, I think it was called Raw. I can't even remember. I only got like 2 videos on the internet, but the last one that I dropped was Raw. I used my backup quad for that video. No reason in particular. I just like to switch back and forth because gives me a good chance to feel the differences between the two quads, and always kind of, it keeps me more in tune. And then I also notice differences between the two, so it helps me tune one more closely to the other. So straight out of the gate, I did an overview of my quads previously, but I'll talk about it again briefly. The motors, again, still using the Lumenier 2207 1700 kVs. I'll talk about why I went to the smaller stator over the 2407s, because I love those. Still using the QAV-R 2 frame. It's just a good all-arounder. It's a pickup truck is how I like to refer it. It's a good all-arounder frame for what I like to do. It's very durable. So the style of flying I do, which is, I guess you could call it bashing, or just flying really aggressive, this frame has stood the test of time. I do snap arms frequently. I probably snap an arm once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, but definitely 1 to 2 a month I'm breaking these things off. The rest of the frame holds up pretty good. This particular frame, like I said, is my primary. This is my #1 frame, or not my #1 frame, but it's my go-to. Currently, the only thing that's original on it is this bottom plate. This bottom plate's probably a year old. The rest of this stabilize the what do you call that? I guess it's just a rigidity frame, just an additional frame piece to keep the arms locked in more tightly. This is original too. It's about a year old, but the rest of the frame is new. I just replaced this top plate a couple of weeks ago because I hit a big water tower, and it smashed my camera and it smashed this top plate. Broke some other things too. I think I smashed a motor too in that crash. The arms are brand new, top plate's brand new, and I think those are the only new components on this. The Brain 3D TPU mount for the GoPro 8 is also new. As you guys see, I still use the carpet sliders, and I'll give you an example here. Like, that thing's been on there a while, but the carpet sliders, these have been on here for months. Well, not months because I just replaced these arms, but maybe 2 weeks. This one here has been on a lot longer, and I've yet to rip any of those off. Conversely, this frame's brand new. I just assembled it maybe 3 days ago, 3 or 4 days ago. and I put the standard foam boots on there, and literally the first battery I flew, I ripped them off. And I've just yet to put the carpet sliders on there. But really, I mean, it's minimal weight. These things are just super durable. They look janky. People laugh at me. I don't care. Whatever. Laugh. Do what you want to do. But anyway, back to the frame. So again, Lumenier 2207, 1700 kV motors. Motors are what they are. I prefer these, and I'll get, like I said, into the weeds there. The big components that I rarely change and I try and stick to primarily is the T motor. 4-in-1 ESC, that's the 55 amp. I was flying KISS for a while, for about maybe not a year, maybe 6 to 8 months, and I switched back to Betaflight. Yeah, we'll get into that later, but the flight controller I use is the SPRacing H7 Extreme dual. It's got the dual fused gyros. I love that. That's probably been one of my most favorite flight controllers. This particular one is pretty old. I actually just see if I can find it here. Two components. I just replaced it. This is an old one I took off. So this one I ran, I've cleaned it. I brushed it all off to clean it up. But this one I was running maybe 3 or 4 months, whenever they released them, probably 4 months ago. Still a working flight controller, but what happened was I just kept the tune standard, and literally the first flight, I hit a tree and it ripped off the USB pad. Super frustrating. So I wasn't, and I didn't set up the Betaflight OSD because I was using the OSD on the TBS Evo. So I never got around. It still flew great, but I never got around. So what I did was I bought a new one. It's on that control, my second quad. But this particular one, luckily I got the tune straight because just the other day I ripped the USB pad off of this one. So I guess I got bad luck with the USB pads, but they do come off pretty easily. That's a warning. Great flight controller though, I absolutely love it. Even with jacks, props, and bent motors, you can still fly. Really, still really smooth. It just handles the noise a lot better than other flight controllers I've used in the past. Still using the Evo, the TBS Evo VTX. I use a Panasonic 1000 microfarad 150C 60 volt capacitor, or 50 volt capacitor. A little bit big, a little bit chunky, but it works. I don't have any issues with it. I mount my antenna in the front for the TBS Crossfire. Run a receiver down in here. You guys could probably see it buried down in there. I run 2 configurations of VTX, and I'll cover that on the other aircraft. Another thing, if you guys can see now, is I use a double-sided tape a lot. I don't use the bolts because I've experienced, and this camera's run a little bit forward, a little bit more forward than I like. I usually smash cameras when they're that far forward on the frame. I usually run them back a little bit, just far enough back where it's protected by, you know, the standoffs, but not so far back that you pick up the actual frame in the frame. But I use the double-sided tape. It seems to work the best to lock the camera in place, and I get it locked about where I like it, which is 20-25 degrees plus or minus, probably 25 degrees. But I get it locked in place and it never moves. When I use the screws to thread it in there, over time it just strips out or the frame breaks away, and then the camera will be flying and the camera will just point down or point up. I don't have to, you know, I just stopped doing it. I break things too frequently. That's why I went to double-sided tape. Again, Brain 3D, the GoPro 8. You guys remember my original video? I was using this janky GoPro guard. This thing was awesome. Obviously, it's taken some hits, as you can see. I kept it as a souvenir, kind of like a little trophy. The 4 GoPro 8s that I've had to replace so far. But these things hold up really well. I like them a lot. The Brain 3D TPU mounts. Then the Axie 2. I don't typically prefer this antenna just because it's very fragile. As you guys can see, I've broken it also, and I've used E6000, which I love this stuff. E6000 is amazing to glue it back together with little degradation to video. But I just kind of wire it in and then zip tie it in place so it doesn't get hit by the props, because that typically breaks them. Then, yep, so that's frame 1. That's my primary. Frame 2, this is my backup. This is, like I said, is a brand new Lumenier frame. I got it secondhand. It was new in a box, but I got it off RC Groups. Really good deal. Couldn't pass it up. But I noticed that Lumenier has changed some things on these new frames. They modified, so before these are the legacy arms. They have a full cutout, or it's not cut out through here, but then they added this notch feature here. And most may be like, why would you do that? Well, I'm gonna explain why you do that. Because what was happening is when I would smash a leg or smash an arm, I would have to pull out all 3 of these bolts to replace it. This one bolt in particular holds the flight stack in place. When you have, and I've changed it on both frames, but when you have washers in between, the silicone washers in between the bolts all the way through, and you try and pull that out, it's a real pain in the rear to get it all back in. So this new design, where they've notched this out, makes it infinitely easier to replace arms, because now I don't have to loosen or remove that bolt right there. I just keep it in place, remove this bolt, and then just pull the arm out and replace it with a new arm. Excuse me. Another addition they did was they added this little cross piece here. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's in here. Amazing. What that does is it fits, I wish I did the assembly, but it fits in here like a nice little wedge for all 4 arms, and it stabilizes the arms in place and they don't move. So much so that when I was forcing the arms together on it, I overdid it and it busted my knuckles up pretty good. These little points here just jammed in my arm. I got like 3 fingers in one time. It was pretty awesome. But where you see this is an older frame, I don't have that little carbon cutout in there, and the legs move when they loosen up. So you have to do bolt maintenance a little bit more frequently. Something else I stopped doing on these frames is I used to just mix and match. Like I said, I'm a buy once, cry once kind of guy. And I've started to experiment with different types of bolts. You'll see that this bolt, or this quad, has these silver bolts versus these, which is just a mix match. But what the reason is I tried titanium, I tried the standard bolts that are shipped with the frame, and they just strip out or break or stretch, flex, do all the things. So I've gone to stainless steel. These are all stainless steel bolts, and I've weighed them against the standard bolt. And what I noticed was there is absolutely no difference in weight. So the difference in strength is yet to be determined, but I have switched to stainless steel. But I'll show you guys. I'll see if I can find some matching bolts here. Scale's probably going to prove me wrong. We're going to do it anyway. But so here's three M3 18 millimeter stainless steel, 1.4 grams. Zero it out. 2 of the standard BOBO, whatever, knockoff, Chinese, whatever you want to call them, standard hardware, 1.4 grams, same weight. But yet, like I said, remains to be seen. I don't know if there's any strength benefit going stainless steel versus this. I'm just into testing different things, and the hardware is one of the things, and it adds no weight. It's nominal. So I'll give you guys some feedback on whether it worked or didn't, or if there was an improved. As you can see, I've started to use it across both frames. I got stainless steel here and stainless steel here. I have stopped using the titanium. They are lighter, but I noticed they break and stretch, flex a lot more quickly, or a lot easier than even the standard hardware that's issued. But anyway, and you can still see there's a little bit of mix match on these bolts, but I don't use the ones that come with the kits anymore. I go down to like Ace Hardware or whatever, and I buy some of the higher grade steel bolts that they have, and they seem to hold up real well. Something else I do is like the standard bolt, excuse me, the standard bolts, I think like 7 mil or 6 millimeter. So they go to about here when you assemble the frame. I use longer bolts. So I use the 18 mil bolts on both the top and bottom. So the bolt actually threads down, about a quarter of the way, or half of the way down the standoff. And what that does is adds rigidity and reduces the amount of failures and flex you get on the standoffs. And there's really not much weight trade-off. I mean, if you guys are, counting grams, you may not want to do that, but I don't count grams. I count survivability and durability. So I run longer bolts in my standoffs to give me longer life on these standoffs, because those things, they'll start wearing out over time. But I usually get pretty good life out of all my standoffs. Rarely do I replace them anymore now that I've started using longer bolts in my standoffs. I don't know if I ever replace them except when I replace a frame. All right, so quad 2. Like I said, it's almost identical to that quad. I fly them equally. So even though, you know, this is a backup, there's days I go out and fly this one, and there's days I go out and fly that one because I want to know the difference between the two. I want to feel the differences. I've got them dialed in to where they're relatively close. They're almost indiscernible. But like the video I just flew, the raw, the video I just uploaded on YouTube, I used this new frame that I just built the other day. And like I said, I didn't notice much of a difference between this one. There is differences. It doesn't rotate as quickly as this one, as my quad 1. But like I said, it's not that different, so different. The only other change from that one is my VTX setup. So I need to get in here and redo it. But I still use the Evo, the TBS Evo. But here I run, and this is just because it's parts on hand, right? I use what I have. In this case, the Triumph, I love this antenna. It's just how I ran it. And actually, I like this configuration a lot better because this antenna is way more durable than the Axie 2. I don't know how long I've had this thing, but it's never broken or anything. Excuse me. And it actually fits pretty smoothly underneath. You guys can see how I've got it run there with my battery strap. So it runs really, it's a really good configuration for me. I like it. And then again, the other difference that I do is the QAV-R doesn't typically come standard where you can feed your wires through the frame. So what I do is I drill these holes out and then I run the wires through the frame. The reason I do that is to protect the wires from, and I, you know, sand them so they're smooth so they don't cut the cable and ground out because carbon's conductive. I do that so it protects this, because typically you come out and it would Velcro or zip tie to the frame itself. I don't like doing that because it would fold over and get hit by the props, or you would wreck and it would cut and pinch in here and just it'd ground out over time. Running it this way, I don't even know how that happened. Must have hit the ground so hard I just snapped it right here. But typically I can run it like this and never have an issue in this area with the plug, the XT60. It's very durable in that configuration, so that's just something I run all the time. My batteries fit perfectly right here. So that's that. All right, when do I replace components? Great question. So one of the first things I see fail, typically, besides like the hardware components, are these antennas, the crossfire antennas. I keep a lot of these on hand because I see these start to get chewed up and they degrade, so I replace them every now and again. I find that I'm replacing these every couple of months, and you'll see I'll start getting, you know, RISI errors and signal noise errors, all, you know, as I'm not even that far away, and that's how I know, like, okay, the antenna's kind of served its purpose. I'll just replace them. And they're real cheap, $4 or $5 a piece. So another thing I replace a lot, excuse me, are these zip ties. Now, zip ties are one of my things. Like, I can't stand cheap zip ties. So I'm the guy that goes on Amazon and I buy the $8 pack of 100, but that $8 pack of 100 will last me a long time. So this particular brand is Thomas & Betts. The reason I like the Thomas & Betts, like this particular one's 24 pounds. Actually, I think this is a 50-pound zip tie, 8-inch, 50-pound. This is an 8-inch, 18-pound. And again, you guys may be like, why in the world are you paying $8 for zip ties? Well, a couple reasons. One is there's a metal shank in here. You probably can't see it, but there is a metal shank in there. So you get extreme locking when you zip these things down. You're never gonna pull that through because of that steel shank right there. And two, with 50 pounds and even 18 pounds, I rarely ever replace zip ties, ever. Now, I'm a little bit excessive just because I like to protect my wires. I don't like them flipping back up and being hit by the props. And I got kind of a mix. I prefer the 18s over the 50s, but the 50s are very durable. Like I rarely break these. So that's why I go with the 18s. Definitely something I recommend if you're a zip tie guy like myself. And if you think about an $8 pack, they last me months. So it's really not that bad. Versus a $2 pack from AutoZone, I'll break 4 just trying to zip tie one motor arm down. Yeah, I don't even waste my time with it anymore. The arms themselves, let's talk about that briefly. When to replace an arm. So I look at a couple things, and I'm like bleeding out over here. You can go to the hospital. There's a couple things I look at. You know, some delamination. If the arm starts to delaminate, that's not a problem for me. I typically just leave it that way. Sometimes I try and snap it clean and break it off. Really what I'm looking for is not so much delamination and damage to the edge. I do actually worry about damage to the edge because this protects my motors. And as this gets worn down over time, it's more susceptible to damaging your motor on a crash versus this protecting your motor. And the other thing I look at is flex. This is probably not a good example, but I always flex check my arms. So I just cross check them periodically to make sure I get symmetrical, or you know what I mean, it's a feel thing, but I like to know, okay, these are pretty solid, and they're brand new arms, so that I would expect them to be solid. But over time, after about a month or so of flying, these will get, and maybe sometimes shorter periods of time than that, these will get some flex to them where I can easily flex them, and that's typically when I tend to replace them. If I can bend this thing out and it's real sloppy, maybe it's mental, but I think I start to feel the motors, you know, a little bit more oscillation and some hard dives and turns. And it also is more susceptible to breaking because it's starting to weaken. And what I would not prefer to do is just continue to ride it out and I snap an arm and then it rips a wire off or tears a pad off the ESC. It's a lot cheaper to replace a $5 arm excuse me, than a $25 motor or a $78 or $79 ESC, just when I could have just replaced the arm. So I always do regular checks on the arms. Again, mine are all brand new right now. These are really stiff because this is a brand new frame, and then the addition of that little, you know, cross adapter. But that's a press check that I do regularly. I also regularly check my bolts. I'll go through, I use Loctite, so I use the blue Loctite on all my bolts initially, and then I don't go back and reapply after that, even if I do a rebuild on the same frame. But I'll Loctite everything the first time, and if I replace the arm, I'll just use the same bolt with the Loctite. I don't change it out. That's that. Motors, so that explains this. I think I explained that in detail for you guys. These are the new, it's coming new with the Lumenier QAV-Rs. I don't know if any of you got, or R2s. I don't know if any of you guys fly that frame. I don't like recommending things because I think that's an individual preference. You fly what you like, and some guys have like 20 different frames and no consistency across the board, which that's awesome, because if you want to explore and experiment, like that's awesome. I'm to the point now where I'm not past it, but I still want to take the time to manage. To me, in my mind, it's really difficult to manage like 5 different frames with 5 different configurations and 5 different sets of motors and 5 different flight controllers. There's a lot of cross programming and assembling all the things. I like to keep it consistent because it helps me build consistency in my flying. So if I stay consistent with my quad builds and the components I use in my quads, it's easier to stay consistent with my flying, because if I break this quad and I go to this quad, I know that it's generally about the same. They're almost identical. So it helps me keep consistency long-term, both in flight and in my builds. The other thing is, if I'm only dealing with 2 quads with identical configuration, I always have the same components on hand. So if I break a motor, I know that I typically keep a stock or a stash of the 2207 1700 kVs. So I don't have to keep in stock, or I say keep in stock, obviously I can get online and buy whatever I want. I can't buy whatever I want. You guys get what I'm saying, but I don't have to keep like random motors. I don't have to keep this motor, this motor, then this frame, then I got all these parts laying all over. I just try and keep it as clean as possible. Again, that's my preference. I also love to build, but I have to like control my desire to build random things when I'm dealing with the quads. Motors. Let's get into that. When do I replace a motor? That's the next good question. A lot of this, again, is feel. It's time on the sticks. It's time flying that quad and getting to know it. And then knowing what it's like when it's freshly built and everything's new and fresh, hot, ready to rock. And then over time, like checking the components and then kind of feeling how that performance degrades over time. I've been flying POPO. Not pushing this on anybody. I'm no affiliate links or any of that. But I've been flying POPO for about 2 years now. I started with the X-Hover. This was the first motor that I got with POPO, and it sold me immediately. The only thing I didn't like is the original POPO props. Used to strip out real easily. I never had, like I said, people have asked me a lot, and I think over in 2 years and insane amounts of flying, I've maybe lost half a dozen props due to a spin-off, maybe a dozen. That's probably a fair estimate. A dozen props to spin off. But now now that I've found the HQProp, the DPs that I use, hang on. Where'd he go? Keep going. All right. So these little fellas right here, these guys. So DP 5.1 by 4.1 by 3. Again, no affiliation, not sponsored, don't care. These are the props I use. I found these to be incredibly durable and stand the test of time for the POPO motors. The shaft rarely strips out, And even if I hit something, I can bend it back and keep flying. The only thing I've seen with this prop is the shaft, not the shaft, but the hub will crack. And like I said, that's where I've lost, like I said, about a dozen. Not due to a strip out, but due to a crack. And it's happened in the cold weather. I've noticed these things just shatter. But it's been very infrequent. It's not frequent enough where I'm like, oh, I gotta bolt it down, or oh, this sucks, I gotta move on to something else. But anyway, back to this. 2 years ago, started with the X-Hover POPO. This was a pretty expensive motor at the time. It was like $25. Buy once, cry once kind of thing, 2500 kV. This was when I was rocking 4S. These were too expensive for me. I was like 25 bucks. I'm breaking them too frequently. So I went to the Hyperflight, or Hyperlite. And this is by Pyro Flip. You guys probably shop from there, or Pyro Drone. I love that website. I love these motors. These are the 2207.5 by 1700 kV. So this is when I transitioned to 6S, but I flew these on 4S for a while. But then some friends recommended, or a friend recommended, switching to 6S. Best decision I ever made for a number of reasons. But really good motor. It was cheap. It was about $19. But for whatever reason, for a while they were out of stock and I couldn't find a replacement. So then I went to Lumenier. And then actually I think I started with the 2207s, the Lumenier. Ran these for a little bit. And then they released the 2407s. This about a year and a half ago. And I got the 2407s. I fell in love with them just because of the power, just raw power and performance. I loved it. Still love it. The problem though, what I started to find over time was due to my flying style and how I crash a lot. You guys can take a look here. If you look at the arm relative to the motor, you'll see that there isn't a lot of meat left on the frame to protect the motor from damage in a crash with a 2407. But if you look at the 2207, ever so slightly more, but ironically that millimeter or so more of meat on the arm makes a huge difference between how many motors I was going through. So I was regularly smashing these. I mean, you can see here, I don't know what I hit, but it bent the bell. Now it's notchy. Same thing, like these motors, I was never wearing these out just due to, like, you know, just flying hard, burning them up. I was wearing them out because I was hitting things. There's another bent one. I never get rid of motors either, by the way. I always keep them because sometimes I can salvage parts. Because like I said, I try and extend out my stuff as much as possible, but I noticed that as I let these nubs wear down, and even when I didn't let these nubs wear down, I was destroying these motors because they were so big. And at $25, $26 a piece, it was like hard for me to swallow. So I went back to the 2207. There was a little bit of a sacrifice in power and performance, but it's almost not even, it's lighter too. That was something that I enjoy. It was took a little bit of weight off my already heavy quad. So let's weigh these fellas out real fast just to see. I'm curious, no other reason. So 36.6 grams to 32.5 grams. So a few grams lighter, shaving that off your quad. I didn't really see a major, there is definitely there is a small degrade in performance by going with the smaller stator, but it's not noticeable enough where I cared so much that I had to just stick with these quads. It became a cost thing. Like I just wanted to save money and not damage parts. Right, I'd go out and just smack one thing hard and then trash a motor and I'm out $25. I just can't, I can't live that way. I gotta eat, got 5 kids to feed, you know? But anyway, so now I'm pretty consistent. I'm sticking with the 2207 1750s. I like this motor a lot. Like I said, it is smaller. There's like, yeah, it's been an all around good motor. I'm running it on both quads now. And I enjoy it. So I digress again. Back to the motor. When do I replace it? There's a couple of things I look for. Typically I'll run motors out. I end up breaking them. I'll break a motor before I'll actually have to replace it, just due to bearings or, you know, the bell, or, you know, it's just notchy or doesn't feel good in flight. But I do notice over time performance reductions, or the quad. There are certain tricks that I know that I do frequently enough, and I know what it takes just based off muscle memory and intuition, that okay, if I do the maneuver this way in this particular gap, I know that I can make the trick. And then I'll fly it with a quad with banged up motors, and I'll notice that there's, and even a banged up battery, but I'll notice there's some performance lag there, and I can feel that in the quad. And I think it just comes with time. But that's one of those things when you fly your quad, if you stick with the same hardware long enough, you start to feel small differences and small changes in your build. When you're hitting certain tricks where you're flying around, you can feel your batteries degrade, you can feel your motors degrade, and I can even feel the frame degrade. May sound weird to some people, but there's like small things I can feel. Like I can feel when the bolts are loose on this thing. There's some obvious things, but for the most part. So the motor, I'll do spin checks. So when I have a prop on it, I'll spin the motor and I'll listen for that grind of the bearings. That's one indicator. Actually, a brand new motor. I hit a wall. Where is it? Oh yeah, this one. You guys can see these were. And I just built this quad. You know, the electronics are old, but the motors and frame were new. I just built this out, and I hit a wall the other day, and basically the motors got really notchy. And you guys aren't gonna be able to hear that, but you can hear the bearings grind. It kind of ticked me off because 25 bucks. I was like, daggone it. That's another downside to the smaller bell. They're just not as durable, but I don't hit them, I don't bust them up as frequently. But I now notice that I've got an oscillation in this quad now at certain points in a dive and a recovery that I used to not have, and I don't have with this quad. And I know that it's not the tune or the isolation, vibration isolation, because it used to never do that, and now it does, and it's after I hit that wall. So that's what I'm saying, I notice differences. So periodically I check my motors, because I am a little bit, like I said, on the cheap side. What I will do is, like this motor here, you guys, can you see that huge dent? I flew this thing for like 2 months with that dent because I was so mad. I didn't want to replace the motor. Who knows, Lord knows what that was doing to other components on my quad. I don't really care. But I flew through it. Finally, I was like, oh, screw it. I'll save my money and I'll buy a rebuild. So I did. But typically, if I had the money or I had the parts on hand, I would replace that bell. I'd probably replace the whole motor, because sometimes when you get a dent like this, you don't know how much damage was caused to the actual stator until you disassemble the motor. And what I noticed was this particular stator had no damage, no discernible damage that I could tell from that bent bell. So realistically, you could keep rocking that out with that bell, but you also have to think too, is like what shear forces did the bearing take, and you know, was anything else damaged or harmed from that? Because that was a pretty hard hit. Excuse me. So typically that's an indicator. If I have a dented bell and the performance of my flight, I see jello in the video or something like that, then I'll change that out. And something else to look for, you'll know if you put brand new props on your quad and you look at your video, you go fly around, you get lines in your video, and you don't typically get lines in your video, that could be an indicator of noise, vibration, you know, entering into your stack and your video as vibration, and you can see that in your video. So like typically you dent up a prop, you'll start seeing those lines in your video. If your props are new and you still see those lines, sometimes that's an indicator that your motors are shot. So dented bells. Another thing is the notchiness. So a notchy motor doesn't typically indicate to me personally that I would say, oh, I would replace that motor. It doesn't become an issue until it becomes an issue. So the notchiness doesn't, like I said, bother me a whole lot. I typically will fly through a notchy motor, but then I start having to wonder like what causes the notchy feel in the motor. And I don't think you can tell, but I had a crash and I didn't realize it at the time, but the spacing between the neodymium magnet and the stator here, you know, this is a little bit notchy, not bad. But then you look at this one, can't really tell, it's a bad example. I guess it's easier, more discernible this way here. So you can actually see the spacing between the magnet and the stator on this side and the magnet and the stator on this side. Maybe you guys can see that, I don't know. But it's different. And what that's doing is the magnets are rubbing up against the stator on the opposite side, and that's creating that notchiness. And it also makes for a very poor performing quad. So that's another thing. And this checks you can do. You can just look at your motors and you can spin them periodically, but you guys can see how notchy that is. That's a good indicator. Scratches, nicks, and dings on the outside of the motors don't bother me too much. Like I said, I'll fly through a lot of that stuff because I'm pretty hard on my gear. So a ding on the motor, I'm gonna ride that out. Excuse me, I'm gonna ride that out as long as I can. But something else I've noticed is the actual capture ring on the bearings, they will start to fail and you'll lose that ring, and then the bearings will start to fall apart, and then you'll lose performance there. And you'll hear the bearings grind, and you pull your motors apart. I used to do a lot of maintenance on my motors. I tried ceramic bearings, tried Japanese bearings, you name it. I used to lube my bearings, used to soak my bearings in oil and then put them in here and they're sealed. And you know what I mean? I did all these crazy things. At the end of the day, this is gonna sound lame, but with camera technology the way it is and all these hyper smooths and real steady and everything else, like, and I mean, honestly, I don't even know that it's worth the headache. Maybe it's fun. Like I still like to tinker with it every now and again, but and then another one I want to show you is another bent bell. So this one's just real banged up. Some other things I've seen is metal shards getting in between the magnets and the stator, and even sand, which will cause it to impinge. I blow that out with a blower. If I can't, I take the motor apart and clean it, put it back together again. If it still exists there, then a lot of times I'll toss the motor. The POPO, these particular motors, this is kind of a nuance of the motor. These get stuck, so that pin will get stuck down. You can lube these, put oil on them, they work great. The other thing I do is plastic will get in the bearing there, and what I'll do is press it in and just work each ball bearing till they're loose, and that usually fixes it. So those are motors. Flight controller. When to replace a flight controller? Hopefully never. Flight controllers are pretty reliable. These SPRacing flight controllers are very reliable. I'm sure you guys are probably sick of seeing my fingers, so I'll hold it with this little tweezer here. My biggest pet peeve of the SPRacing or any flight controller are the USB pads. They rip off very easily, too easily. And also this pad here, which is, if you stack these, those things rip off. You just have to be careful to make sure they're not contacting or grounding out. But SPRacing, really durable flight controller. I've had very few issues with these. I've had no issues with these. This is my third one. Well, this is the original one, but I'm on the third one now. I used SPRacing back in the day when it was just the F7. Now it's the H7. Really good piece of hardware. The T-motor ESCs, zero issues ever. Really good ESC. So let's get into the controller. So I recently bought, man, this is giving me some heartburn. If you guys are still watching this, I'm like 40 minutes deep, but whatever. This is the first time I'm doing this, so you guys are just bear through it or just skip through, whatever. FR X-Lite Tango 2, TBS Tango 2. Just got this the other day. Put the full-size gimbal. Gosh dang. Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about. Sticks, full-size sticks on there. I couldn't use the ones that were on there, were driving me nuts because they were so smooth. But what I have noticed is I've been flying the FR X-Lite for about 2 years now. I had the original one, the red one, or black, I guess it was black. It was really low rent. They released this one about a year ago, maybe 6-8 months ago. Love this thing, absolutely. Can't say enough good things about it. You know, the metal gimbals, Hall gimbal, Hall sensor. I don't like how I had to integrate this, but it's not that burdensome. It doesn't bother me that much. And it's still a really small compact radio. And it just like, I don't know, man. There's a few things in life that you can just like put in your hands and you're like, wow, that's really comfortable ergonomically. And to me, this controller is just really comfortable ergonomically. Like I can fly all day long with zero fatigue. There's no weight to the controller, but it's enough weight that it feels like you're holding a controller. And then the rubberized feel, I sound like I'm selling for these guys. I'm not, no affiliation. TBS Tango 2, really cool controller. I actually love this thing. I love the integrated radio, so I don't have to do that. I love the compact design. I love the antenna design. I love everything about it. But what I hate about it, is the ergonomics. Like I've been flying this thing for about a week now, and I'm pretty consistent about flying it. Like I'll flip-flop back and forth, and then I went a full day straight using just this controller. In the stick feel, I've adjusted them, tried to get them as closely to the X-Lite as I can get it, but it's just the hand placement where my hands are. I'm so used to this that when I put my hands here, I just don't get that like money feel. You know what I mean? Like the money shot, I don't get the money grip feel. Aside from that, every other aspect of this radio is amazing. I fucking love it. But like I said, it's just that I cannot get past the ergonomics. Like it's just bothering me. I'll keep working with it. Maybe that perspective will change over time. I'm sure it will, because I really like the controller and I really want to make it work. But right now, and I even noticed speed. Like I'm not as fast on the sticks with this controller as I am this controller for whatever reason. I mean, I'm just like, this just feels good to me. Probably because I've been using it for 2 years. I think after 2 years of using this one, it'll probably feel good too. What else? I think that about covers it. Batteries, I won't talk a whole lot about batteries. I've talked to you guys before about what I use and why I use the Adrenaline Thunder Powers. I absolutely love these batteries. One, because this little doodad here. Thanks, Steel, for that little tidbit. Battery maintenance, won't go into huge detail because this isn't a battery maintenance class, but I always check my cells. If I have a rough crash or a rough day at the field, I smell them, smell for that little sweet smell. If I don't smell a sweet smell and I don't see any damaged cells, I'll let it run. When I'm charging, I always check the impedance of each cell to see if anyone's way out. And then I also, actually, if you look at that, you guys can actually see it. The cell, it's bad. Man, look at that, learning point. So see that? You guys probably can't see it. Delirious. You can see a liquid in there. That is a leaky cell, my friends. Interesting. So you see that, see some juices in there, you smell that sweet smell. Safely discard that battery. You can discharge it completely, you know, ground it and put it in salt water, leave it for 24 to 48 hours and then dispose of it properly. Don't throw it in your trash. Take it to a battery dispose all location. But the 1100 milliamp 100C Adrenaline Thunder Powers, love them. Can't say enough about that battery. This is actually a pretty durable battery too. I've abused the crap out of these things. I mean, here's one. I got taped up. Just I've ripped the plastic to pieces. But yeah, take care of your batteries. Don't cut corners with your battery packs. You'll have a fire on your hands. Tools. I covered a little bit of the tools. Hobby Lobby, best purchase I've ever made. These little fellas here, so they're tension tweezers. You guys, I keep a set of regular tweezers on hand. These little fellas, I hate them. They suck. Get the hell out of here. These tweezers, on the other hand, friggin' amazing, because you can just grab things. You can pinch wires, hold them. If I get a wire caught in there, I can reach in there and grab it, and it holds tension, and I just pull it out. Best $5 you'll ever spend right there. You're welcome, Hobby Lobby. Shoot, plug in Hobby Lobby. They ought to be paying me for this. They're not. What other key things do I have that you guys want to know about? I've already been talking for a long time. I think that's about it. You guys may, yeah, I won't get into that. We'll do that a different time. I think I talked about my tools. Turnigy, had these things almost 10 years. I wish they still made them because I would buy another set. Absolutely love them. Really good tool set. They weren't even terribly expensive even 10 years ago. I think it was, I got both standard and metric, the entire set. They were like 70 bucks, which probably sounds expensive if you're paying like $2 for the cheap knockoff ones. But for as long as they lasted me, they'll probably last me my lifetime in this hobby. But yeah, can't say enough about that. And I think, guys, that about covers it. So hopefully I answered your questions. I'll just do a quick rehash. I run 2 quads. They're identical as closely as I can make them. The only exception would be how I'm running my VTX and antennas. Quad 1, quad 2. If you can't afford 2 quads, invest as much as you can in your primary quad so that you're using quality components so you have less issues. I've noticed, back when I first got into the hobby, I tried to cheap it and I just had things fail so regularly. I got frustrated. And nowadays the industry, I guess they do make the inexpensive line stuff is still very reliable and good. For me though, I think maybe it's just a mind thing. I don't know. It's probably just a mind thing. It's all in my head. But I think spending the extra money on good components goes a long way. It speaks volumes about how your quad flies and performs. But same quads, QAV-R 2s. The new arms, they sell these with the new arms now. It's pretty slick. Brain 3D TPU mount. I put these sliders on here to protect my GoPro a little bit more. I put them on the bottom. And then CM1200 Lumenier Crossfire, the Nano. I use a T-motor 55 amp, the F55, the SPRacing H7 Extreme dual. So I want to show you the TBS Evo VTX. And then a Panasonic capacitor. It's the 105C 50 volt. You guys can see it right there. 1000 microfarad capacitor. And then I don't recommend this antenna. Don't recommend the Axie. As you guys have seen, I've had to glue with E6000. Hang on. You guys may ask, what is E6000? So 2 other things I can't live without is 3M double-sided, the 15-pound tape. That stuff's amazing. And then E6000. This stuff here is like the old shoe goo. If you remember, if you guys skateboarded when you were kids, used to repair your shoes with shoe goo. This stuff is very similar to that. It's like rubber. Comes out, you know, like caulk almost, and it hardens like rubber. This stuff is great. But anyway, sealed up the antenna. I'm sure it affected the axle ratio or the impedance, the output, whatever, but I didn't notice anything. And then I think I've talked enough. I'm sick of hearing my voice. That'll be it for now. I think later I'll come back, maybe one day do a build video, hopefully if I get around to it. But I really appreciate you guys hanging out. Hopefully you hung out for the entire 48-minute conversation I just had with myself. And that's it. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you guys later. Boom.